Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Abati. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai.
Good morning.
All righty. Well, let me tell you what is happening around the world. We're talking a lot about war and conflict as usual, unfortunately, and then we've got an extra story to include this morning. So let's start in Russia, where President Vladimir Putin has expressed reservations, throwing some doubt over the 30-day ceasefire proposal, as he says he agrees with the need for peace in theory, but questions the practice. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We agree with the proposal for a ceasefire, to cease hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that this ceasefire should lead to an enduring peace and should remove the root causes of this crisis. We are in favor of it, but there are nuances. What are they? First of all, what are we going to do about this incursion in Kursk region? If we ceased hostilities for 30 days, what would that mean? Would that mean that everybody there would leave? Should we release them after they have committed numerous crimes against civilians there? Or will the Ukrainian leadership command them to surrender?
Putin asked how a ceasefire would work, wondering how the 30 days would be used. Would it be for Ukraine to mobilize, to rearm, or to train people? Those are the questions he had with this theory in principle. Well, in response, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Putin is stalling and is preparing essentially to reject this ceasefire plan. A reminder that in essence, Ukraine wants a two-stage process. They want a quick ceasefire and then talks about a longer-term settlement, while Russia believes the two processes cannot be separated and all issues should be decided in one single deal. Let's move on also within the European region and take a look at Armenia. Now, Armenia and Azerbaijan have agreed to a peace agreement set to end nearly 4 decades of conflict between these two post-Soviet countries. The neighboring countries have been engaged in a decades-long conflict over the Nagorno-Karabakh, which is a breakaway region in the Caucasus Mountains that was home to around 120,000 ethnic Armenians. The region is internationally considered part of Azerbaijan, but for decades it was under the control of Armenian separatists. Now, Armenia's foreign ministry says the peace agreement is ready for signing, and while Azerbaijan confirmed the success of the peace talks, hurdles do remain. Azerbaijan wants Armenia's constitution to eliminate the claims against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Azerbaijan as a prerequisite in order to allow for the signing of that peace treaty. And then moving on to the African continent, could longtime foes Ethiopia and Eritrea be headed towards war again? Well, clashes between two of Africa's largest armies would signal a death blow for this historic peace that we've been seeing in the region, for which Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed did win a Nobel Peace Prize for in 2019. Tigray forces have seized towns, and Eritrean government has decided to implement a nationwide military mobilization. Relations between the two countries have steadily deteriorated since the signature of that Pretoria Agreement in November 2020. And finally, earlier, actually not this month, last month, we did take this story about this United Nations judge being accused of modern slavery charges. And now we know that that judge has been convicted of forcing a young Ugandan woman to work as a slave in the United Kingdom. Now, during the questioning when she was first arrested, this judge, she did actually tell police that she had immunity and was not a criminal by the way of her holding diplomatic passport because she is a United Nations judge. This is something that was captured on police body cam footage. Now, Lydia Mugambe, who is the name of this, that's the name of this UN judge, she is now convicted of taking advantage of her status over her victim in the most egregious way. That's what the court said. And she is now convicted of tricking this young woman into coming into the United Kingdom. Now, prosecutors say that she prevented the woman from holding down steady employment and forced her to work as a maid and provide childcare for free. Now, when we talked about this in February, we did, of course, condemn the actions. At that point, she was just accused, and now we know that she's been convicted. But it does ring bells of familiarity when we look at the former Deputy Senate President Ike Ekweremadu, when he was also arrested and convicted in the United Kingdom under modern slavery charges. This is just another example, I think, of the United Kingdom really putting its force behind these new updated laws when it comes to modern slavery. And I can imagine that many people would be welcoming these types of convictions when it comes to the exploitation of people and the abuse of diplomatic powers.
What can I say? Femi, I said it very aptly yesterday. I knew Putin was going to play his game. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. You know what Vladimir means? A great ruler of the world. You know what Putin means? He who follows a path. That's who he is. He's a master at this game. Trump does not understand this game. So what did he do yesterday? After the big ceremony with Belarus, he finally got around it. Steve Witkoff, by the way, was in Russia to also still talk to him. So he starts to give his preconditions. The ceasefire initially was without precondition by Ukraine. The idea was to have a ceasefire, then talk afterwards. But like Putin has always done, like he broke the ceasefire at Minsk, like he broke every other ceasefire, then he starts to throw tantrums. What would this be about? For Ukraine to rearm? For this to happen? And while Trump doesn't understand the game, he had weakened Ukraine. Putin had taken more ground in the Kursk region. In fact, the Sukha, one of the biggest cities in Kursk, he has taken that. He's making incursions. So he's playing his game. Guess what? A diplomat does not tell you no or yes. They tell you maybe. So Putin has just said maybe in the game. Even Trump came out to say, wow, this guy beat me at the game. And that's what I was talking about, thinking foolishly. That's why I told the story about how Trump went to receive a Gorbachev look impostor. So even Trump said it yesterday that, wow, that's incomplete. That's not what we bargained for. But that's the game Putin will play. The next thing he'll do, he will be this time. Because he forgets that people that you are dealing with the Russian side, these are skilled diplomats. Sergei Lavrov's name was on the Budapest Memorandum in 1994. He's still in foreign affairs for Russia till date, since 1994. So they are more skilled. So the waiting game begins. Let's see if Trump's real estate buddy, Steve Witkoff, will be able to get a deal out of Russia. But it remains to be seen. And that's why the rest of Europe are saying that we need to start fighting our own game. Nagorno-Karabakh, what is happening there? After Sterling took over things, Sterling ceded a lot of ground. And he said, you know what? I cede this to Azerbaijan.
Joseph Stalin.
Joseph Stalin, yes. So when he did that, as time went on, but it was heavily dominated by the Armenians. But as time went on, when Armenia became a nation and all of that, then a lot of separatist forces joined with the Armenians. They fought for it back. They got into Armenian region. Azerbaijan, over the last couple of years, has also had the ascendancy with oil production and things like that. They've got some money, so they bought artilleries and all of that. Then they had a fight about 2-3 years ago, and they got the region back. So Russia has also been trying to intervene in the matter and say, okay, let peace reign and all of that. So that's what they're talking about this time around. It also relates with Eritrea. What happened? We all know the long historical antecedent, Italy and Britain colonizing that area. Asmara, Eritrea was on its own for a while. It had the likes of Isaias Afwerki. They had a border dispute arrangement at some point, between Ethiopia and Eritrea. They had a long, protracted battle in 1998, and that went on for a while. They made peace a couple of years ago. But guess what happened?
18.
All of a sudden, when Ethiopia started fighting the Tigrayan forces, they brought in Isaias Afwerki and his troop. And Isaias has got a very good fighting force. So they said, oh, let's fight for you. And they did help the Ethiopians to fight their war against the Tigrayan forces. But guess what? Now they are staying put in Tigray. They don't want to go again. So they also want to make incursions. So I'm sure Isaias Afwerki remembers that, oh, this used to be our foes from the past. Let's do a number on them and let's see it pans out. And the Ethiopian army is quite stretched at a point because they have been fighting a lot of internal struggles with the Tigray forces and all of that. So that's what goes on and on. Today, we are together. Tomorrow, we are no longer together. As regards the judge, she knew what she was doing, obviously. And like Dr. Abati cited before we came on air, based on the Vienna Convention, you are still subject to the municipal laws of that country because it's a sovereign. So she's citing immunity in her conversation. I mean, a false shot. And the painful part is she's a lawyer.
She's a judge.
I mean, she's a judge.
Yeah. Okay, so Linda Mugambe, that Lydia Mugambe is her name, but there's more to the story. And actually, she might have been able to cite immunity, but there are a few things that have eroded that opportunity. One is the conferring body, whether the country or in her case, the United Nations, to waive her immunity so she's able to face the full wrath of the law. Right. The UN has waived her immunity. Also, the UN, she became a judge in the UN 3 months after the case was opened.
Yes.
And so that also invalidates that. So just to mention, the reason I'm saying that is because when you look at the story, what is said to have happened is that the conversation, this case started in February 2023. That's when Thames Valley police stations opened investigation into this following a report that she was guilty under the Modern Slavery Act. Yes. I think there's a lot of lessons, and that's why I want to really break it down, because a number of Africans who are in diaspora, who are watching, might learn a lot of things from this, because things have changed. What we used to do, or people used to do and thought it was normal, is no longer the norm. Correct. That law has now changed the way that we bring in domestic staff and how we treat domestic staff when we travel abroad. So this is what happened. The former Deputy High Commissioner of Uganda to the United Kingdom had applied for the person who cannot be named for legal reasons to come in. But what they then discovered following investigations into interactions between he and Lydia Mugambe was that there was an understanding that when the lady arrives, she would work for Miss Mugambe in return for a favor between Miss Mugambe and the Deputy High Commissioner. Yes. Now, when this happened, of course, they thought those are the kind of things that happen. We just treat human beings as if they're a commodity. Okay, because Lydia Mugambe came to the UK on a student visa, so did not have the legal standing to bring in a domestic staff on her visa category, but the Deputy High Commissioner could do so. So when he brought her in, she started working for Lydia Mugambe, and according to investigations, she wasn't well paid.
Wasn't paid at all.
Paid at all. Her visa, she had visa restrictions, ID, and you know these things that we do, because we brought somebody in, we hold their passport so they don't run away. You spent a lot of money bringing them to the UK or the US, and so you do all these things. So these are lessons to learn. Definitely. Now, she had the opportunity. The Ugandan authority chose not to waive his immunity, so he couldn't be prosecuted, even though he would have been investigated. Right. So just to mention that, number one, when you bring domestic staff in, ensure it is done properly. Number two, they have a minimum wage in the UK. Ensure they are paid properly. Right. Number three, don't hide they still have rights despite the fact that you're the one that brought them in. She was found guilty on 4 counts, 3 of them unanimous, 1 majority vote, and so she'll be sentenced in May.
Okay, it seems to me that the key issue about Lydia Mugambe, that is her name, the diplomat now, who is to be sentenced on May 2 by the court in England. Yes. And she claims that she has immunity. And being a UN judge, she has not committed any crime by bringing a domestic servant from her home country of Uganda. What we're dealing with here is the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Privileges and Immunities. Yes. 1961, that is the convention. Now, in that convention, Articles 29 to 36 defines the privileges and immunities of diplomats. If you're a diplomat in a receiving country, your premises cannot be violated, for example. In Article 22, there will be respect for your diplomatic status. You know, you cannot pay municipal taxes and all of that. However, let me just summarize 29 to 36 in terms of privileges and immunities. Yes. In 37, Article 37, that Vienna Convention now says, however, that even if you are a diplomat, you cannot, you can be held liable for things that you do outside your basic mission in that country. In other words, you cannot violate laws of the country. If you go and do businesses that are not related to diplomacy, you will pay tax. In other words, there are no absolute immunities and privileges. What has happened in Lydia Mugambe's case is that she went and brought, a domestic servant against the laws of the receiving host country. And for that moment, what the British are doing now is that she's been technically declared persona non grata. Persona non grata under the Vienna Convention is defined under Article 9 of that Vienna Convention. So these are the relevant portions, in terms of diplomacy. So she will be sentenced. So if you are a diplomat, you just do what you have to do in that country. You don't go out on a frolic of your own. That's that about that. As for Putin, now what Putin made clear yesterday when he was meeting with the Belarusian president, Kusachenko, something like that.
Lukashenko.
Yes, is that, look, yes, the question was posed to him about this agreement on Tuesday in Jeddah, where, Kiev or Zelensky was saying that, look, yes, we agree to this ceasefire, but on the condition that Russia too will agree. Now, what happened is that Putin is playing hardball. He says that, it will be on his own terms. There must be guarantee that Ukraine is not going to use the opportunity of the 30-day ceasefire to regroup and rearm, and that there are fundamental root causes that will still have to be addressed, and that he would like to have a talk with President Trump. So these are the issues in this regard. In other words, it's very clear that the Russians are very skeptical about this. As for Azerbaijan and Armenia, well, if there is peace, it's welcome. But there is not enough time for me to go into the history and the war in 1990, in 2000, in 2023, the agreement and all of that. But Germany supports peace, between both parties. Agreed. And Armenia says they're also ready. And Azerbaijan is asking for an amendment of the Armenian constitution and also the abolition of the Minsk group. These are some of the details, but not enough time.
Again, so much to talk about on the War Brief. Let's move on to newspapers very quickly. Let's begin with the front page of This Day. This Day, as always, features a host of the biggest stories, one of them being former Kaduna State Governor Nasir El-Rufai saying that he knows who paid to become ministers in President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's cabinet. Now, El-Rufai also hinted that former President Muhammadu Buhari gave his blessings to El-Rufai before he left the APC. Meanwhile, the New Telegraph leads with the People's Democratic Party and the Labour Party maintaining their dismissive attitudes really towards the opposition coalition movement, while insisting they can defeat the ruling All Progressive Congress in 2027. The Daily Independent also features the former Labour presidential candidate Peter Obi, as well as the chairman of the PDP Governors Forum and Bauchi State Governor Bala Mohammed meeting and beginning a political realignment process. The Daily Sun reports on the Senate President Godswill Akpabio raising concerns that the actions of suspended Kogi State lawmaker Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan may have a negative impact on female politicians, as a lot of men may be scared of appointing or selecting females as deputies. I mean, what was stopping them before? That being said, actually, Ogun State's last two deputy governors have both been women, so there's that. Senate President also expressed these concerns at plenary yesterday in response to a vote of confidence passed in him by his colleagues. The Punch leads with the federal government's response to former President Olusegun Obasanjo for rating Muhammadu Buhari for being the worst in corruption. Separately, in response to OBJ's comments on the Lagos-Calabar Express project, the federal government had told the former president not to use the road when it is created. Essentially, if you don't like it, don't use it. And then on the front page of The Guardian, Iyabo Ojo writes about this discrepancy between first-class graduates in Nigeria and the lack of solutions to Nigerians' problems. There's always a very interesting write-up there. And then if we're looking at the United Kingdom's version of The Guardian, Health Secretary Wes Streeting has ordered a high-stakes reorganisation of the National Health Service that will scrap 10,000 jobs in an attempt to free up cash for frontline care. That's as experts warn the move to scrap NHS England and fold it into the Department of Health could distract politicians from ending long waits for treatment, which is the real problem with the NHS in England.
I don't know. Okay, we don't have time.
No,
Thank you very much.